shocking revelations have surfaced about one of the most infamous killers in modern American history. What began as a single late-night traffic stop would unravel into a nightmare that gripped the entire nation. Behind the clean-cut smile of an intelligent, charming young man was a predator unlike anything the public had ever seen. This case would expose the terrifying darkness hidden behind ordinary faces, and forever etch the name Ted Bundy into the pages of history. It all started with something ordinary, something so routine that no one could have imagined the horror hiding behind it. On a quiet night in Salt Lake City, Utah, an officer named Bob Hayward noticed a small, beige Volkswagen Beetle driving through his neighborhood. There was nothing outwardly alarming at first, but the car's slow movement, the way it circled the same block twice, raised the experienced officer's instincts. He decided to follow it. The driver was a young man with carefully groomed hair and a polite, almost overly confident manner. He didn't look dangerous. He looked like someone who might have been a law student, a clean-cut neighbor, the kind of person people trusted without a second thought.
A judge in Miami today followed the jury's recommendation and sentenced Theodore Bundy to die in the electric chair for the murder of two co-eds. Bundy is the 136th person under death sentence in Florida. Ed Rabel reports.
Before pronouncing the sentence, Judge Edward Cowart let Bundy make a statement.
I'm not asking for mercy, for I find it somewhat absurd to ask for mercy for something I did not do. So I will be tortured for and will suffer for and receive the pain for that act. But I will not share the burden for the guilt.
In imposing sentence, Judge Cowart cited the savagery of the crimes and what he called the indifference of the defendant.
This court, independent of, but in agreement with, the advisory sentence rendered by the jury, does hereby impose the death penalty upon the defendant, Theodore Robert Bundy.
Then, in an unexpected move, perhaps an afterthought, Cowart stunned the courtroom with some parting words for Bundy.
Take care of yourself, young man.
Thank you.
I say that to you sincerely. Take care of yourself. It's a tragedy for this court to see it's such a total waste, I think, of humanity that I've experienced in this court. You're a bright young man. You made a good lawyer. I'd love to have you practice in front of me, but you went another way, partner.
Bundy says he'll appeal. Meanwhile, he has been ordered to the state prison to await setting of the date of his execution in the electric chair. Ed Rabel, CBS News, Miami.
But when Hayward asked him to step out of the car, the illusion began to fracture. What the officer found inside the vehicle would soon set in motion one of the most terrifying manhunts in American history. In the car, officers discovered an ice pick, rope, a crowbar, handcuffs, garbage bags, gloves, and a mask made from pantyhose. None of these items belonged to a college student on a night drive. They belonged to a predator who had already learned how to hunt. The driver's name was Theodore Robert Bundy. At that moment, he was just another suspect. Soon, his name would become a symbol of something far darker. Bundy had spent years constructing the mask he wore. On the surface, he appeared intelligent, ambitious, even charming. He studied law, volunteered in political campaigns, and maintained a polished image. But beneath that carefully crafted exterior lived a manipulative and violent mind. His ability to mimic normalcy was not accidental. It was his weapon. Long before that traffic stop, young women had begun to disappear in Washington and Utah. Students would walk home from campus or step into parking lots, never to be seen again. There were no dramatic scenes, no screams heard in the night. They simply vanished. Witnesses remembered a man with a cast or crutches asking for help, sometimes calling himself Ted. He looked harmless, even kind. And that was exactly why they followed him. In those early months, law enforcement struggled to connect the dots. There were no fingerprints, no reliable descriptions, no clear suspect. Different jurisdictions worked separate cases without realizing they were chasing the same man. Bundy moved carefully, picking his victims with calculated ease, striking in locations he knew well. He blended into the background so seamlessly that he could walk through a crowd minutes after an attack, and no one would have noticed him. Behind his soft smile and polite manner, Bundy was studying people. He knew where students gathered, how campus security worked, which parking lots were dimly lit. Each abduction was methodical. Each disappearance was almost invisible. Investigators would later realize that Bundy's first known victim was not his first attack. His violence had been escalating for years, hidden beneath his public mask. What made him so dangerous was not just his cruelty. It was his intelligence, his patience, and his complete lack of empathy. When he was finally arrested after that initial traffic stop, Bundy kept his composure. He joked, he smiled, he played the role of an innocent man wrongfully accused. He refused to panic. That calm, detached confidence only deepened the unease of those who encountered him. In the days that followed, police would begin linking Bundy's name to a series of unsolved disappearances. The Volkswagen Beetle was quickly recognized by several witnesses. The neatly dressed, soft-spoken young man matched the description of the mysterious Ted, who had approached young women shortly before they vanished. Piece by piece, the mask he had worn so well began to crumble.
Hollywood has recreated the execution of serial killer Ted Bundy, but this is not how it really played out. Former Fox 13 anchor John Wilson ought to know. He was there.
I don't remember any moment like this in my life.
Then a sudden jerk snapped his body back, and it was over.
John witnessed Bundy's execution in Florida's electric chair 30 years ago, and he said Bundy did not appear to be in stress or shock.
His demeanor was puzzling to all of us as 40 witnesses in there, and I'm sure going through everybody's head in there is, why is he smiling at us?
John is now working on a documentary with Tony Panaccio, who also witnessed the execution. That's how they met.
The best way I could describe his demeanor in the room before he sat down was almost like a performer on closing night.
Bob Deacle was the state attorney who prosecuted Ted Bundy, and he saw the same thing at his trial.
It was all about him. He wanted as much attention as he possibly could have.
Was Ted Bundy mentally ill?
He wasn't right, but he wasn't mentally ill. He knew the difference between right and wrong, he just didn't care.
Bundy confessed to some 30 murders just before he died, dragging out his confessions to try to delay his execution. Who knows how many young women he really killed.
This is a serial killer in front of you, unlike any we'd ever known in our time.
And that fed the attention that Bundy craved. John saw it firsthand.
Bye, Ted Bundy, goodbye.
The scene outside,
Ted Bundy, you're dead!
was a carnival. It was, people were jumping up and down, people were yelling, people were applauding, people were clapping, especially when his hearse went by. We were all glad to get rid of him. I'm not saying that. But it was a different tone for those of us who were inside.
30 years later, he reflects on the need to reflect.
Very few like Ted Bundy, but there are others who have killed many people. I think we need to know much more about our society and who we are and what makes us who we have become. We don't know nearly enough about that.
Craig Patrick, Fox 13 News.
But this was just the beginning. Bundy was clever, unpredictable, and terrifyingly patient. He understood the legal system well enough to play with it. As investigators began to close in, Bundy started weaving another plan. Not to fight the charges head-on, but to stay one step ahead of everyone trying to stop him. By the end of that year, fear had spread across multiple states. Parents warned their daughters not to walk alone at night. Women changed their routines. Entire communities were on edge, whispering about a man named Ted and his Volkswagen Beetle. But no one yet understood the full scale of the darkness they were dealing with. This was only the opening move in a nightmare that would stretch across years, state lines, and countless lives. Theodore Robert Bundy had been caught once. But the world was about to learn that catching him would not be enough. As the investigation intensified, the mask Theodore Robert Bundy had worn so well began to slip. For years, he had moved unnoticed through cities and campuses, but a single survivor would shatter that illusion forever. Her name was Carol DeRunch, a young woman from Utah, whose encounter with Bundy would become the turning point in one of the most infamous manhunts in modern American history. On a November afternoon, Carol was approached at a shopping mall by a man who introduced himself as a police officer. His voice was calm, his demeanor authoritative, but friendly. He told her there had been a break-in near her car and that she needed to come with him to the station to file a statement. What Carol didn't know was that the man she was following was not an officer at all. It was Bundy, in uniform, with a fake badge, and the same deadly charm he had used many times before. When she got into his Volkswagen, the mask finally began to crack. The smell of the interior, the unsettling silence, the wrong direction he was taking. Her instincts screamed at her that something was terribly wrong. And then came the handcuffs. Bundy snapped one around her wrist, but before he could secure the second, Carol fought back with everything she had. In a desperate struggle, she escaped the car and fled into the night. Her survival would give police something they had not had before, a witness who had seen the predator up close. For the first time, law enforcement had a face, a voice, and a vehicle tied to the name Ted. Composite sketches were drawn. Witnesses from previous cases came forward. Piece by piece, investigators in Washington, Utah, and Colorado began to connect their fragmented cases into a single, terrifying pattern. A young, intelligent man with a Volkswagen Beetle, a calm voice, and a clean-cut appearance was targeting women across state lines. Bundy's arrest for the DeRange kidnapping came soon after. But this was not the end. In many ways, it was the beginning of a psychological chess match. Inside the courtroom, Bundy turned the trial into a performance. He represented himself, using his law school training to manipulate proceedings, request access to the law library, and gain privileges other inmates could only imagine. While the world saw a serial kidnapper, Bundy was already planning his next move. The trial attracted growing media attention. His confident posture, his polite tone, even his charm fascinated the public. Some observers, unfamiliar with the depth of his crimes, saw him as a charismatic law student fighting the system, but beneath that polished surface, the predator was restless. Bundy's first escape was as bold as it was unexpected. In June of 1977, during a recess at the Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen, Colorado, Bundy was allowed access to the law library on the second floor. No one suspected that he had been training for weeks, doing push-ups and practicing jumps inside his cell. While deputies focused on paperwork, Bundy opened a window, climbed out, and jumped 2 stories down to the ground. He vanished into the mountains without leaving a trace. For 6 days, he wandered through the wilderness, surviving on stolen food and sheer cunning. During that short time, the entire state erupted into panic. Roadblocks were set up, officers searched forests, and helicopters swept the valleys. Bundy was no longer just a suspect. He was a fugitive, one the media described as brilliant, charming, and dangerous. But his freedom would not last. Exhausted and disoriented, Bundy was recaptured less than a week later. When police found him, he smiled as if nothing had happened, as if the entire escape had been a game he had already won. It was a warning. This man was not like other criminals. He did not panic. He calculated. By this point, fear had spread across multiple states. News reports described a killer who could blend into any crowd, escape from locked buildings, and manipulate the legal system with terrifying ease. Women began carrying whistles and mace. University campuses increased security. Parents warned their daughters not to go anywhere alone. Bundy was no longer an unknown predator. He was a name whispered with dread. Even behind bars, his presence infected everything around him. Investigators knew they had captured a man capable of unimaginable cruelty, but they also knew that walls alone would not contain him forever. Bundy's first escape had proven that the danger was far from over. The justice system was preparing for trial. The media was circling like vultures, and somewhere in the shadows of his cell, Theodore Robert Bundy was already thinking about his next move. Because for Bundy, control was everything. And when he couldn't control the outside world, he found a way to break free and reclaim it. The nation had barely begun to grasp the full scale of his crimes. But soon, the darkness he carried would explode into something even more horrifying. His second escape, and the murders that would follow, would scar a generation and define the face of true evil for decades to come. Theodore Robert Bundy had already proven he could outsmart security, manipulate legal systems, and vanish into the night. But nothing could have prepared the nation for what would follow. After his first escape, the world watched him with cautious relief, believing the nightmare had been contained. It was a fragile illusion. 6 months later, Bundy would do it again, and this time, the cost would be measured in blood. By the winter of 1977, Bundy was being held in a Colorado jail, awaiting trial for the murder of Corinne Campbell. The jail was small, and compared to maximum security facilities, poorly equipped to hold someone like him. Bundy knew it. He observed, waited, and planned. Every moment of supposed compliance was another step toward freedom. On the night of December 30th, Bundy squeezed through a hole in the ceiling of his cell, an opening he had carved over weeks of careful preparation. He crawled through the crawl space, moved along the building's rafters, and emerged above a jailer's apartment. No one heard him. No one saw him. By the time the guards discovered his absence, Bundy had already vanished into the freezing Colorado night. His escape triggered an immediate manhunt. Officers searched roads, highways, mountains, and train stations. But Bundy was a step ahead. He made his way to Chicago, then boarded a bus to Atlanta, and finally ended up in Tallahassee, Florida. The journey itself revealed the terrifying reality. Bundy could move freely across the country, blending in as though nothing had happened. And in Florida, he would commit the crimes that would finally expose his true nature to the world. On the night of January 15, 1978, Bundy broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University. What followed was a brutal attack that shocked even seasoned investigators. Within minutes, 2 young women were dead, and 2 others were seriously injured. There were no signs of hesitation, no signs of control slipping, just a frenzy of violence from a man who had convinced himself he was untouchable.
The attempts by me to participate in the courtroom, and this is more, we're speaking more to a problem that attorneys have in giving up power. Maybe we're dealing with a problem of professional psychology, where attorneys are so jealous of the power they exercise in the courtroom, they're afraid to share it with the defendant.
Then defense attorney Robert Haggart, without explanation, asked to be excused and walked out of court.
Witnesses reported seeing a man fleeing the house in the early hours of the morning, but Bundy was already disappearing into the night. His attacks were methodical, fast, and savage. He knew how to slip away, leaving behind only fragments of evidence. A few weeks later, Bundy abducted 12-year-old Kimberly Leach from her school in Lake City, Florida. Her disappearance sent shockwaves through the state. It was no longer just a story of young college women in danger. This was a predator who would not stop, who could strike anywhere, at anyone. But Bundy's overconfidence was finally catching up to him. On February 15, 1978, a patrol officer named David Lee noticed a stolen orange Volkswagen Beetle driving erratically in Pensacola, Florida. It was almost poetic. The same type of car that had marked the beginning of Bundy's downfall was now part of his final capture. When Lee pulled the car over, Bundy fought. But this time, there was no escape. The officer overpowered him and placed him under arrest. In the car, investigators found stolen credit cards, IDs, and stolen license plates. The charming mask that Bundy had built for years was crumbling in real time. The trial that followed would become one of the first true media spectacles of the modern era. Cameras filled the courtroom. The public couldn't look away. Bundy represented himself again, turning legal proceedings into a twisted theater where he cross-examined witnesses, argued with judges, and even proposed to a woman in the middle of the trial. His strange charisma fascinated some and horrified others. But this time, the evidence was overwhelming. Hair samples, bite marks, eyewitness testimony. It all built a case that even Bundy could not talk his way out of. The jury deliberated for less than 7 hours. Theodore Robert Bundy was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. Even on death row, Bundy continued to manipulate. He gave interviews, denied guilt, then confessed, then denied again. In the final days before his execution, he admitted to killing over 30 young women, though investigators believe the true number may be much higher. On January 24th, 1989, Theodore Robert Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. Crowds gathered outside, some holding signs, some celebrating, some simply waiting to see the end of a man who had terrified the nation. When the announcement came that Bundy was dead, cheers erupted. For many, it marked the closing of a long, unbearable chapter. But Bundy's story did not end with his death. His crimes changed the way law enforcement worked. The lack of coordination between states during his spree exposed deep flaws in how serial offenders were tracked. Those failures led to the development of better interagency cooperation, more sophisticated investigative techniques, and the establishment of centralized databases for violent crime. For survivors, families, and investigators, the case of Theodore Robert Bundy is not just a story of evil. It is a story of how easily a monster can hide in plain sight, how charm can be used as a weapon, and how fear can grip an entire nation. His legacy is one of horror, not because of how he died, but because of how ordinary he appeared while committing acts beyond comprehension. And while his name remains infamous, it serves as a reminder of the importance of vigilance, coordination, and the relentless pursuit of justice.